November 15th, 1325. An army was advancing towards the town of Zappolino, and by sunset, a fierce battle commenced. People were shouting, "Bastarde Guelfi! Bastarde Ghibellinzi!" as the sounds of swords clashing and the stomping of horses and their cries rang throughout the town. The battle would only last a few hours before the Welfs were routed and trapped within their own town of Zappolino. And so the story goes that a ransacking took place, and the greatest spoil taken from that town was an old oak bucket that would later become a venerated object that you can still see today in the Torre de la Giraldina. You may be asking yourself, why was an old oak bucket the greatest spoil taken? And why did the Guelfs and the Ghibellinzi hate each other so much? What caused all of this to happen? We will answer all those questions and so many more in today's Historical Quarrel. All right, guys, real quick before we begin today's episode, I do need to go over a couple things. First off, disclaimer, this show is not suitable for work. It includes many no-no words. It includes dirty and dark humor and some fake outs that I will do better at calling out, as I can read things pretty dryly. And I realized a few people may have thought a certain Smindrides getting something shoved up his ass was actually a true story. So I want to fix that and say, hey, my bad, not real, that was me making a joke. But he was a stuck-up asshole, so, it fit. Also, I was recently interviewed on my friend Ashley's podcast called the Passion Podcast. I'd like to ask each of you to please go check out my friend's show. The interview with me will be coming out here in a week or two. And honestly, her show has a ton of interesting guests on it, and it is really, really fun to listen to. I had a good time going through her catalog, and I think that you will as well. And then last but not least, I am starting up another podcast with my buddy, though. This one's going to be primarily with my friends, and it's going to be us just kind of hanging out, talking, shooting the shit. It's going to be called Stereotypical. It's not going to take time away from my prep work on this show. It's just something fun we want to do together, and it'll give you guys a little more insight into our lives. We'll go over some topics we find interesting. For this first episode, I've been deep diving into some fringe Reddits that I'm going to share with them, and we're probably just going to have a laugh at, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So please follow our social media accounts to stay up to date with that. The social media accounts are just Historical Quarrels. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Threads now, TikTok. And yeah, we'll announce it on all of those. I'll also leave a link for it on my on the episode of Historical Quarrels when the first episode of Stereotypical drops. I'll leave a link for that for you guys to click on. So that's it for announcements. So let's go ahead and just kind of go over real quick what we're going to be doing. For today's show, we'll first be going over the rivalry between the Welfs and the Ghibellinzi, their history with each other, and some interesting quarrels that popes and kings had that definitely led into the War of the Oaken Bucket. So that'll be lots of fun. We'll go over why the Battle of Zappolino took place, its key players on who caused it, and then we'll go over a poem that the battle inspired and how a wood bucket from this would become an important historical artifact. So, let's begin. The Welfs and Ghibellinzi were factions supporting the Pope and the Holy Roman Emperor, with the Welfs loving on that sweet, sweet sugar daddy Pope support, and the Ghibellinzi started to get some lockjaw and were done with the Pope's bullshit and being forced to suck his dick. And so they went ahead and just sucked the dick of the Holy Roman Emperor, probably because it was just a little smaller, a little easier to gag on. During the 12th and 13th centuries, Rivalry between these two parties formed an important aspect of the internal politics for medieval Italy. The struggle for power between the papacy and the Holy Roman Empire arose with the investiture controversy, which began in 1075 and ended with the Concordat of Worms in 1122. The Welf versus Ghibellinese conflict initially arose from the division caused by the investiture controversy, which we'll cover a little more in a later episode. But it was essentially a problem started between the monarchy and the church on who was in charge of who, and about whether secular rulers or the Pope had the authority to appoint bishops and abbots. So to sum it up, it was just a dick measuring contest between the monarchy and the papacy. And the Concordat of Worms essentially ceded the rights of the king to appoint bishops and popes back to the papacy, allowing the papacy to determine if the base of the dick is measured from the top above the balls or from the base where the balls and the shaft meet, which will sometimes give you an extra inch if measured from there. I tend to take the two measurements, then I like to get an average to really get like a full measurement. Though when I'm getting very scientific about it, I will use the TMI formula created by Randy Marsh, which will actually reduce your length if your base measurement is above 5 inches. Now, why do I know this? And how many dicks have I measured to test out a fictional character's math formula? Don't worry about it, okay? Upon the death of Emperor Henry V of the Salian dynasty, the dukes elected an opponent of his dynasty, Lothair III, as the new emperor. This displeased the Hohenstaufen, who were allied with and related to the old dynasty. Out of fear of the Hohenstaufen, Lothair III placed himself under the Pope's overlordship. He ceded to the Pope all imperial rights under Henry V's Concordat of Worms. War then broke out in Germany between those who supported the Hohenstaufen and those who were aligned to Lothair and the Pope. Upon Lothair's death, the Hohenstaufen, Conrad III, was elected, while Lothair's heir, Henry the Proud of the House of Welf, continued fighting. And that's, so Welf, the Italian version spelled with a G, and Welf, the, German Holy Roman Empire version is spelled with a W. Welf is an Italian form of the name of that house. The family of dukes of Bavaria, including the namesake Duke Welf II of Bavaria, as well as Henry the Lion. The Welfs were said to have used the name as a rallying cry during the siege of Weinsberg in 1140, in which the rival Hohenstaufens, led by Conrad III, used Wilbelingen, or something like that. I don't know, it's German. The name of castle today known as Wabelingen, and subsequently became Ghibellino in Italian, or Ghibellinzo. Just kind of proving that the Germans and Italians have always been interconnected, even before, World War II and all that stuff happened. Germans and Italians were just loving on each other. Thus, the Hohenstaufen faction became known as the Ghibellinzi, and the Welfs eventually became known as the Welfs. Welfs. The Ghibellinzi were the imperial party, while the Welfs supported the Pope. The names were probably introduced to Italy during the reign of Frederick Barbarossa, when Frederick conducted military campaigns in Italy to expand imperial power there. His supporters became known as Ghibellinzis. The Lombard League and its allies were defending the liberties of the urban communes against the emperor's encroachments and became known as Welfs or Welfi. Broadly speaking, Welfs tended to come from wealthy mercantile families, whereas Ghibellinzi were predominantly those whose wealth was based upon agricultural estates. Welf cities tended to be in areas where the emperor was more of a threat to local interests than the Pope. And Ghibellinzi's cities tended to be in areas where the enlargement of the papal states was the more immediate threat. Essentially, if the Pope could fuck with your money more easily than the monarchy could, you were a Ghibellinzi, and if the opposite were true, you were a Welf. The Lombard League defeated Frederick at the Battle of Lagano in 1176. Frederick recognized the full autonomy of the cities of the Lombard League under his nominal suzerainty. Suzerainty. I play a lot of Civilization. You'd think suzerainty or something like that. It's suzerain and then T at the end. I can speak English, I swear to God. Anyways, moving on. The division developed its dynamic in the politics of medieval Italy, and it persisted long after the confrontation between emperor and pope had ceased. Because they still couldn't agree if the pope or the king had more of a right to fuck them and their families/children. And you know the priests more than likely were diddling kicks back then. Don't lie to yourself. That joke is 100% deserved. Okay? They deserve that shit. Smaller cities tended to be Ghibellinzi if the larger city nearby was Guelph. As Guelph Republic of Florence and Ghibellinzi Republic of Siena faced off at the Battle of Monteperti in 1260, Pisa maintained a staunch Ghibellinzi stance against her fiercest rivals, the Guelph Republic of Genoa and Florence. Adherence to one of the parties could, therefore, be motivated by local or regional political reasons. Within cities, party allegiances differed from guild to guild, rion to rion, and a city could easily change party after the internal upheaval. Kind of like how if enough people get into power in your local town, all of a sudden there's just a shit ton of people that are just all for Trump out of fucking nowhere. And you're left wondering what the hell happened, because you could have sworn last week Jim was the staunchest of Democrats. But because he owns a store in that area, he is now putting on a MAGA hat and is telling all the immigrants to get the fuck out of town. And you're just like, whoa, why did this happen? And that happened all the time in Italy because of these two political parties, essentially, that developed out of a rivalry between popes and kings. Contemporaries did not use the terms Guelph and Ghibellinzi much until about 1250, and then only in Tuscany, where they originated, with the names Church Party and Imperial Party preferred in some areas. So now that we're past the 13th century, really, but kind of still into it. At the beginning of the 13th century, Philip of Swabia, a Hohenstaufen, and Otto of Brunswick, a Guelph, were rivals for the imperial throne. Philip was supported by the Ghibellinzi as a son of Frederick I, while Otto was supported by the Welfs. Although the Welfs initially succeeded in getting Otto crowned as emperor, Otto turned against the papacy. Rumor has it, the reason for turning against the papacy was that he looked a little too much like a kid, like just really young. And one of the priests might have just mistaken him for a choir boy. And Otto killed the priest after he caught him jacking off over his sleeping body. And so turned against the papacy and was then excommunicated for murdering a priest. Obviously, that wasn't a historical record, but something I came up with. The actual truth is very interesting and very integral to today's main quarrel, so let's go over it real quick. Otto's election pulled the empire into the conflict between England and France. Philip had allied himself with the French king, Philip II, while Otto was supported at first by Richard I, and after his death in 1199 by his brother John. The papacy, meanwhile, under Innocent III, determined to prevent the continued unification of Sicily and the Holy Roman Empire under one monarch, seized the opportunity to extend its influence. Because no one but the Pope was allowed to control things. Because God chose him. You bow to your Pope, God. Bow to him. Therefore, Innocent III favored Otto, whose family had always been opposed to the House of Hohenstaufen. Otto himself also seemed willing to grant any demands that Innocent would make, appeasing Pope God Innocent very much. The confusion in the empire allowed Innocent to drive out the imperial feudal lords from Ancona, Spoleto, and Perugia, who had been installed by Emperor Henry VI. At the same time, Innocent encouraged the cities of Tuscany to form a league, called the League of San Genesio, against imperial interests in Italy. The cities placed themselves under Innocent's protection, and in 1201, Innocent announced that he recognized Otto as the only legitimate king. In return, Otto promised to support the Pope's interest in Italy. Very much a, hey, I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine type of situation here. And it worked out well for them at first. Otto also had the support of Ottokar I of Bohemia, who, although at first siding with Philip of Swabia, eventually threw in his lot with Otto. Otto's cause was further strengthened by the support of Vladimir II of Denmark. Philip achieved a great deal of success in the civil war that followed, allowing him in 1204 to be again crowned king, this time by the Archbishop of Cologne, which is very important and very... but getting crowned king by that archbishop kind of, it gave you more street cred, essentially, on if you were the king or not. In the following years, Otto's situation worsened after England's defeat by France. So he lost England's financial support because of that. Many of his allies changed sides to Philip as well, including his brother Henry, which I'm sure made family dinners really awkward for them. Henry's just coming over for dinner, and Otto's just kind of sitting there like, so, hanging out with Philip a lot more, I'd see. And Henry's like, yeah. And they just ate in silence. I feel like I've made that awkward, but that is exactly how that room would feel if those two were in it during this time. Otto was defeated and wounded in battle by Philip on the 27th of July, 1206, near Wassenberg. And as a consequence, he also lost the support of the Pope, who began to favor the apparent winner in the conflict. But Innocent didn't favor him too much, just enough to stay in power just in case Otto lost. It's like when you play Monopoly and you try to stay buddies with people and who if they teamed up with, they would absolutely destroy you. So you just try to keep them mad at each other. And meanwhile, they don't notice that you are totally getting all the red properties, even though you already have the orange ones, and are about to fuck them both over so goddamn hard because they played like dumbasses and went for the yellow, green, and blue properties, not realizing those ones aren't landed on nearly as much statistically. Those fools! Anyways, that's what the Pope did here, essentially, and just played both sides. Otto was forced to retire to his possessions near Brunswick, leaving Philip virtually uncontested as German king. Innocent III forced the two warring parties into negotiations at Cologne, and in exchange for renouncing his claim to the throne, Philip promised Otto the hand of his daughter Beatrix in marriage, together with the Duchy of Swabia and an enormous dowry, which is, it's a decent deal. However, Otto refused because his daughter was, quote, boring to look at and did not have a large enough bosom. You gotta have tits, dude. If you don't got tits, then what are we even doing here? Just kidding. There's no reason given as to why he refused, though many assume it was because Otto wanted more power and didn't want to give up his claim to the throne. As the Civil War was about to recommence, Philip of Swabia was murdered on the 21st of June, 1208. And after Philip's death, Otto made amends with the Stauffen party and became engaged to Philip's daughter Beatrix, and probably gave her the saddest pity sex of all time. Because, it took her dad dying for him to be like, yeah, I guess I feel bad enough to fuck you. Okay. You can ride my dick, I guess. Yeah, all right. I'm not going to feel great about it, but whatever. So sad. So sad. Poor Beatrix. In the 1208 imperial election in Frankfurt on the 11th of November, 1208, he gained the support of all the electoral princes, as he promised he would not make hereditary claims to the imperial crown on behalf of any children he might father. Which really does make the pity sex all the more true. And Beatrix was probably fugly as fuck. So he's like, I don't want to have kids with this bitch. It doesn't matter. I have to be married to her, so I'm not going to have any legitimate kids anyways. Otto didn't give a shit. So now fully reconciled with Innocent, Otto made preparations to be crowned Holy Roman Emperor. To secure Innocent's support, he promised to restore to the papal states all territory that it had possessed under Louis the Pious, including the March of Ancona, the Duchy of Spoleto, the former of Ravenna and the Pentapolis. Traveling down via Verona, Modena, and Bologna, he eventually arrived at Milan, where he received the Iron Crown of Lombardy and the title of King of Italy in 1208. He was met at Viterbo by Pope Innocent and was taken to St. Peter's Basilica, where he was crowned emperor by Pope Innocent on the 4th of October, 1209. Right before rioting broke out in Rome, forcing Otto to abandon the city. Now, you might be wondering, what caused the riots? I also was wondering that. Googled it, couldn't find shit. So we're going to assume they were mad at priests diddling their kids. That's, just classic Catholic stuff, okay? We're going to go on with that. Not content with the successes so far, Innocent also obtained from Otto further written concessions to the papal, including allowing all elections of German bishops to be conducted according to church ordinances, and not to prevent any appeals to Rome. He also promised to hand over to the church all income from any vacant seats which had been flowing into the imperial treasury. Because God King Pope Innocent III wasn't some peasant-ass bitch, and Sky Daddy said he needed a fancier castle for his chosen one to stay in. After abandoning Rome, Otto marched north, reaching Pisa by the 20th of November. Here, probably advised by Peter of Celano and Dippold, Count of Acerra, he was convinced to abandon his earlier promises. And I've taken it upon myself to translate exactly how this conversation went down for my younger listeners. So, Peter was all like, yo, on God, like for real, Pope Innocent be acting sus, yo. And then Otto was all like, no cap? And then Peter said, no cap, for real. Think about it. Innocent got like mad drip, and he'd been trying to finesse power from you. So it's time to clap back, King. And then Otto was like, bet. Otto immediately worked to restore imperial power in Italy. After his consecration by the Pope, he promised to restore the lands bequeathed to the church by the Countess Matilda of Tuscany nearly a century before, and not to move against Frederick, King of Sicily. Otto quickly broke all of those promises. He threw out the papal troops from Ancona and Spoleto, reclaiming the territory as imperial fiefs immediately. He then demanded that Frederick of Sicily do homage for the duchies of Calabria and Apulia. And when Frederick refused to appear, Otto declared those fiefs forfeited. So he immediately just went against Frederick. Otto then marched on Rome and commanded Innocent to annul the Concordat of Worms and to recognize the imperial crown's right to make nominations to all vacant benefices. Which, holy shit, to have that like complete 180 of a flip and just be like, nah, fuck you, Pope. Which I kind of get because the Pope kind of fucking sucks. And this obviously infuriated Supreme God Pope King Innocent III, who promptly excommunicated Otto on the 18th of November, 1210. Otto then tried to conquer Sicily, which was held by the Stauffen King Frederick, under the guardianship of Innocent III. The German nobility by this time was growing ever more frustrated with Otto. They felt, instead of wasting his time in Italy and measuring the size of his cock with the popes, it was his first duty to defend the northern provinces of the empire against Vladimir II of Denmark, who had taken advantage of Otto's distractions by invading the northern provinces of the empire and possessing the whole Baltic coast from the Holstein to Livonia, which really fucked up a bunch of trading routes and then fucked over their money way too much. So while Otto was in southern Italy, several princes of the empire, including the archbishops of Mainz and Magdeburg, at the instigation of King Philip II of France, and with the consent of the Pope, elected Frederick King of the Romans at the Diet of Nuremberg in 1211. Otto's ambassadors from Milan appeared before the Fourth Lateran Council, pleading the case for his excommunication to be lifted. Although he claimed he had repented for his offenses and declared his willingness to be obedient to the Pope in all things, Innocent III had already recognized Frederick as emperor-elect. This was due to the realization he was going to lose pretty much fucking everything since he pissed off his home, the papacy, and really only repented as a last-ditch effort to retain any semblance of power. Otto returned to Germany to deal with the situation, hopeful of salvaging something from the looming disaster. He found most of the German princes and bishops had turned against him, again because they were losing money, and that Frederick, who had made his way up the Italian peninsula, had avoided Otto's men who were guarding the passes through the Alps, and had arrived at Constance. Otto soon discovered that after Beatrix died in the summer of 1212, probably from having the driest of vaginas, because, that shit didn't get fucked at all. Y'all know. It was like a one and done situation for Otto. He was like, I ain't fucking her anymore. And that Frederick arrived in Germany with his army in September of 1212. Most of his former Stauffen supporters deserted him for Frederick, forcing Otto to withdraw to Cologne, and on the 5th of December 1212, Frederick was elected king for a second time by the majority of princes. The support that Philip II of France was giving to Frederick forced King John of England to throw his weight behind his nephew Otto. The destruction of the French fleet in 1213 by the English saw John begin preparations for an invasion of France. In this, Otto saw a way of both destroying Frederick's French support as well as bolstering his own prestige. So he agreed to join John in the invasion, and in February of 1214, as John advanced from the Loire, Otto, together with the Count of Flanders, was supposed to make a simultaneous attack from Flanders. Unfortunately, the three armies communicated about as well as, sadly, most first-time married couples do. John, who had been disappointed in his hope for an easy victory, after being driven from the Roche Almoine, had retreated to his transports, that the imperial army, with Otto at its head, assembled in the Low Countries, essentially just expecting Otto to know to retreat without warning him. Kind of like how a wife or a husband just expects you to notice something is off about them, or something they think is obvious. But no, I have no clue it's obvious. I'm not a fucking mind reader, Becky. How the hell was I supposed to know you wanted me to go out and buy the groceries today? You usually do it, and you say you like doing it. Am I supposed to just assume it was all lies? And you hated it the entire time? How the hell is that fair, Becky? Tell me. That's like me expecting you to know that I wanted you to shove a dildo up my ass during sex last night, and then being mad at you that you didn't, despite the fact I had never previously indicated that I like that. And in fact, had seemed to indicate that I didn't want anything up my ass during our previous sexual encounters. Tell me how that's fair, Becky. Fucking tell me. On the 27th of July, 1214, the opposing armies suddenly discovered they were in close proximity to each other. On the banks of the little river Marque, near the bridge of Bovines, Philip's army numbered some 15,000, while the Allied forces possessed around 25,000 troops. The armies clashed at the Battle of Bovines. It was a tight battle. So fucking tight. Oh, it was the tightest little battle you've ever seen. Okay, that's fucking gross, I'm sorry. But it was lost when Otto was carried off the field by his wounded and terrified horse, causing his forces to abandon the field. And because Otto was forced again to withdraw to his private possessions around Brunswick, this defeat allowed Frederick to take the Aachen and Cologne, and so Otto was deposed in 1215. Absolved from his excommunication, he died of disease at Harzburg Castle on the 19th of May, 1218, requesting that he be mortally expedited in the atonement of his sins. Historian Kantorowicz described the death as gruesome. Deposed, dethroned, he was flung full length on the ground by the abbot, confessing his sins, begging to be punished, saying he was a bad, bad boy who deserved to be hurt. Meanwhile, the reluctant priest beat him bloodily to death with rods. It was said his last words were, "Harder, Daddy." Such was the end of the first and last 12th emperor. The harder daddy and the begging to be beat was not true. So, sorry about that. So Otto was replaced with Philip's heir, Emperor Frederick II. Frederick II was an enemy of both Otto and the papacy, and during Frederick's reign, the Welfs became more strictly associated with the papacy, while the Ghibellinsi became supporters of the empire and Frederick in particular. They fucking loved Frederick because Frederick was honestly pretty cool. He's very likable. He was said to have been very charming, very pleasant in his company, obviously good looking as well. And Pope Gregory IX excommunicated Frederick II in 1227 for failing to go on crusade, and then again for going on the Sixth Crusade while excommunicated. He got excommunicated twice, and Frederick was like, I really don't give a fuck what you say, old man. I do whatever the fuck I want. Which really pissed off the Pope, because the Pope thought he was the main character, when in fact, he was just an annoying NPC. It's a little more Gen Z, talking points there. So I just want to keep them engaged. While Frederick was in the Crusader states, the division developed there, and his regent in Italy fought a war with the Pope. That war was ended, and the excommunication was lifted in 1230, but the hostility continued. Because no one fucks with the Pope. You don't fuck it up with the Pope, I tell you. Okay, anyways. In 1237, Frederick entered Italy with a large army, intending to subdue the defiant cities of the Lombard League. Pope Gregory tried to broker a peace, but failed. Frederick defeated the League at Cortenovoa and refused all peace offers from them. He besieged Brescia, but was repulsed, and this would give Frederick the biggest hate boner against the Pope and made him determined to capture Rome. So in 1239, Frederick was again excommunicated by Pope Gregory, which I'm wondering if, the Pope even realized that fucking mattered. It does matter, because anytime a king gets excommunicated, it essentially tells all the cities that the king isn't recognized by the church, and so they don't have to pay tribute, so it can fuck with some money. But the Pope must have realized Frederick was really well liked, and nobody gave a shit if he was excommunicated. So in response, Frederick expelled a Franciscan and the Dominican friars from Lombardy, and made his son Enzo imperial vicar in Italy. He also annexed Romagna, Marche, the Duchy of Spoleto, and part of the Papal States, and marched through Tuscany, hoping to capture Rome. He was forced to retreat, sacking the city of Benevento. Soon, the Ghibellinsi city of Ferrara fell, and Frederick was once more advanced in Italy, capturing Ravenna and Faenza. The Pope called a council, but an imperial Pisan fleet defeated a papal fleet carrying the cardinals and prelates from Genoa in the Battle of Giglio. Frederick continued marching towards Rome, and Pope Gregory soon died. And because of that, Frederick, seeing the war being directed against the church and not the Pope, withdrew his forces, releasing 2 cardinals from Capua. And although Frederick marched against Rome over and over throughout 1242 and 1243, this was done as he would have had, he essentially kind of gave up on the fight for a little bit, as he would have had a harder time convincing people to destroy religion than a person, and was really only able to gather that level of support against the current pope or previous pope by marking him as an apostate, essentially being like, no, actually, you're the one who's just, using the title of pope to, overstep your bounds, and you're going against God by going against me, essentially. So after a year and a half of contentious debate and coercion, the papal conclave finally reached a unanimous decision. The choice fell upon Cardinal Sinibaldo de Fresci, who very reluctantly accepted election as pope on the 25th of June, 1243, taking the name Innocent IV. As a cardinal, Sinibaldo had been on friendly terms with Frederick, even after the latter's excommunication. The emperor also greatly admired the cardinal's wisdom, having enjoyed discussions with him from time to time. Following the election, the witty Frederick remarked that he had lost the friendship of a cardinal, but made up for it by getting the enmity of a pope. Frederick's letter to the new pontiff, or pope, was done in respectful terms, offering Innocent congratulations and wishing him success, as also expressing hope for an amicable settlement of the differences between the empire and the papacy. Negotiations aimed at this objective began shortly afterwards, but proved unavailing. Innocent refused to back down from his demands, and Frederick refused to back down as well, and the dispute continued. Its major point of contention being the restitution of Lombardy to the patrimony of Saint Peter. Essentially, Innocent was like, "I really want Lombardy, buddy. That's something that I think we deserve, and you kind of took unfairly." And then Frederick was like, "Fuck no, dude, that's mine. Fuck off." Neither of them backed down from this. So the emperor's machinations aroused a good deal of anti-papal feelings in Italy, particularly in the papal states, and imperial agents encouraged plots against papal rule. Realizing how untenable his position in Rome was growing, Innocent IV secretly and hurriedly withdrew, fleeing Rome on the 7th of June, 1244. Yeah, it was only a fucking year after he got elected that this shit went down. So Frederick essentially congratulated him, was kind of talking with him, and during 43 and 44, they got pissed off at each other enough that Frederick was like, "Okay, let's assassinate him." Someone that was like my friend at one point. "I'll kill him. That's fine." So, yeah. Traveling in disguise, he made his way to Sutri and then to the port of Civitavecchia, and from there to Genoa, his birthplace, where he arrived on the 7th of July. And on the 5th of October, he fled from there to France, where he was joyously welcomed, making his way to Lyon, where he arrived on the 29th of November of 1244. Innocent was greeted cordially by the magistrates of the city. Innocent now found himself in secure surroundings, and out of the reach of Frederick II. In a sermon preached on the 27th of December 1244, he summoned as many bishops as he could to Lyon. 140 of them eventually came to attend what became the 13th General Ecumenical Council of the Church, the first to be held in Lyon. The bishops met for 3 public sessions on the 28th of June, the 5th of July, and the 17th of July of 1245. Their principal business was to subjugate the Emperor Frederick II, plotting rebellions, and on the 17th of July excommunicating Frederick, which absolved his subjects from their allegiance to him, which for them meant they could rebel and have the church's support. When the city of Viterbo rebelled, the Pope backed the Welfs. Frederick immediately marched to Italy and besieged Viterbo to assert power, and probably wondering why they would try to do this when they knew they got their asses stomped in not that long ago. The Pope signed a peace treaty with the Emperor, relieving the city after the Emperor left. The Cardinal Raniero Capocci, as leader of the Viterbo, had the garrison massacred. The Pope made another treaty, but he immediately broke it and continued to back the Welfs. Essentially being like, "Okay, here's the treaty. Frederick, leave us the fuck alone." And then just like, "Ha! I got you! I got you, bitch!" And just backstabbing him. The Pope supported Henry Rasp, Landgrave of Thuringia, as king of the Romans, and soon plotted to have Frederick killed. When the attempt failed, the Pope fled to Liguria. And to be fair, it seems like they had a bunch of incompetent assassins. Definitely not the assassins from Assassin's Creed, because, if I was playing the game, definitely would have gotten the Pope and the king there, like, easily, Ezio knew what the fuck he was doing. Soon the tide turned against the imperial party as the Lombard city of Parma rebelled. Enzo, who had not been present, asked his father for help. Frederick and Ezzelino III da Romano, the tyrant of Verona, besieged the city. The imperial camp was ambushed by the Welfs, and in the ensuing Battle of Parma, the imperial party was routed, losing much of their treasury, so they got fucked hard financially. Really sucked for them. Frederick retreated and gathered another army, but the resistance of Parma encouraged other cities to rebel, and Frederick was powerless to do jack shit, essentially. Things became worse for the imperial party, as the Ghibellinesi were defeated in the Battle of Fossalata by the Bolognese, at which point Enzo was captured and imprisoned until his death. Although the Ghibellinesi started recovering, defeating the Welfs at the Battle of Singoli, Frederick by then was ill. And before he died, much of his territory was recovered by his son Conrad IV, thus leaving Italy at peace for a few years. After the death of Frederick II in 1250, the Ghibellines were supported by Conrad IV and later King Manfred of Sicily. The Welfs were supported by Charles I of Naples, and that was about it for the Welfs. So, and kings really fucking hated the church, which makes sense. The kings didn't like being told no, and the popes didn't like being told no. So when you have two people who think that they're the top dog, they're going to fight. The Cienzi Ghibellines inflicted a noteworthy defeat upon the Florentine Welfs at the Battle of Monteperti in 1260. And after the Hohenstaufen dynasty lost the empire when Charles I executed Conrad V in 1268, the terms Welf and Ghibellines became associated with the individual families and cities, rather than the struggle between empire and papacy. In that period, the stronghold of Italian Ghibellines was the city of Forlì in Romagna. The city remained with the Ghibellines factions partly as a means of preserving its independence, rather than out of loyalty to the temporal power. As Forlì was nominally in the Papal States, over the centuries the papacy tried several times to regain control of Forlì, sometimes by violence or by allurements. And the aforementioned allurements were never fully described. But I have a feeling they tried to offer salvation at first, being like, hey guys, listen, you come back to us, you're going to heaven. I'm the Pope, and I can promise you're going to go to heaven. And when that didn't work, they probably offered their protection, being like, hey, listen, I get it. I get it. You think that you're living good enough lives to, get to heaven on your own. And I can't convince you that really I'm the only way because God told me that I'm his chosen one, but it's fine. It's fine. What if I give you guys some protection, right? We got all this, cool guys here that can go fuck up stuff. And, I promise you that if you ever get into trouble, we definitely are going to take care of you. And that probably got laughed at. So they probably had to think about things that they enjoyed saying, guys, the Pope came into a meeting and was like, guys, what do we love most? That has to be what we offer them next if we want them in our control. Nothing else is going to work. They've already said no to salvation. They've said no to our protection. What is it that we love more than anything else in this world? And so they probably thought about it for a while. And then when they came up with their solution, they sent one of their salesmen to the city. And the salesman would be like, listen, this is going to be our final offer, right? We thought about everything. And the popes, the cardinals, and the priests are willing to give up the thing that they love most. Some choir boys. And I bet that really confused the shit out of the city officials, and they were probably like, well, wait, what? You guys offered us salvation and then protection, which is way better. What choir boys? And then the salesman was like, listen. These bad boys. Gives them a slap on their ass. They can sing. They help clean rooms. They're really good at shoe signing, cleaning laundry, anal and oral sex, scripture reading, giving baths, performing other menial tasks. And then the official was probably like, whoa, hold up, what was that? What was that part again? And then when they confirmed the anal and oral sex part, they probably stopped negotiations complete with him. Just, not happening. At least that's what I assumed happened. And we're going to pretend that's what happened. A salesman for the Pope. That's going to be a reoccurring guy in other episodes. I hope you like that. Slaps choir boys on the ass and is like, listen, they give good head. Anyways, the division between the Welfs and the Ghibellines were especially important in Florence. Although the two sides frequently rebelled one against the other and struggled for power in many of the other northern Italian cities as well, didn't really matter too much because essentially the two sides were now fighting either against German influence in the case of the Welfs or against temporal power of the Pope in the case of the Ghibellines. In Florence and elsewhere, the Welfs usually included merchants and burghers, which I couldn't find the translation for in time. So I'm assuming they make hamburgers, okay? They make hamburgers. That's what they do. Well, the Ghibellines tended to be noblemen. They adopted peculiar customs such as wearing a feather on a particular side of their hat or cutting fruit in a particular way, according to their affiliation, which is almost exactly what Democrats and Republicans do here in America. I mean, think about it. You can, in most states, tell who's voting for who in an election based on their appearance. If they're wearing a MAGA hat, or wearing blue jeans, a nice button up, or a clean flannel shirt, they are more than likely Republican. If their hair is dyed, any color that doesn't happen naturally, if they have on jeggings, or really what looks to be an amalgamation of clothes they happen to find in the closet, they are more than likely a Democrat. I'm not saying both sides always dress this way. It's just an example of how similar we are to those in the past. And it's really fucking funny that humans have been this petty about politics for centuries. Could you fucking imagine if today you went to a restaurant and you saw someone cutting fruit and you're like, oh, they're fucking Democrat or fucking Republican cutting fruit. So weird. That's what they did in Italy. It's wild. People have always been this petty. It's great. I love it. The Genoese families, like the Fieschi and the Grimaldi, conventionally sided with the Wealth Party. In contrast with the Doria and some branches of the Spinola families, with Genoa, while Genoa was often under Welf rule in the early years of the 13th century, in 1270, Ghibellinzi Oberto Spinola and Oberto Doria managed to revolt against Welfs and started a dual government, which lasted a couple of decades. Welf families fled to their strongholds, which were in the east of the Fieschi and west Grimaldi. They were forced to cease their resistance after several military campaigns, which ended with their readmission to the Genoese political life after paying war expenses. Okay, so now we're a little closer to the time of the battle. After the Tuscan Welfs finally defeated the Ghibellinzi in 1289 at the Battle of Campardino and at Vicopisano, the Welfs began infighting. By 1300, the Florentine Welfs had divided into black and white Welfs. So we didn't just have two sides anymore. There were different sides of who supported the Pope and who didn't. So the blacks were continuing to support the papacy while the whites were opposed to the papal influence, specifically the influence of Pope Boniface VIII. They just didn't like that pope in particular. They still liked the papacy and they liked the church. They didn't like the pope. Dante was among the supporters of the white Welfs. In 1302, he was exiled when the black Welfs took control of Florence. Those who were not connected to either side or who had no connections to either Welfs or Ghibellinzi considered both factions unworthy of support, but were still affected by the changes of power in their respective cities. Emperor Henry VII was disguised by supporters of both sides when he visited Italy in 1310. In 1325, the city-states of Welf Bologna and Ghibellinzi Modena clashed in the War of the Bucket. So now we're here. So before we get into this, let's back up just a little bit, okay? Azzo VIII de Este Marquis of Ferrara controlled Modena from 1293 to 1308 and confronted Bologna partly to bolster his lukewarm support among Modena's nobles, and his elected successor, the Mantuan Passarino Bonaclosi, was an ancient agent of Emperor Louis IV of Bavaria. He continued the Ghibellinzi war policy, with Parma and Reggio also under his power. Pope John XXII declared Bonaclosi a rebel against his church and granted indulgences as befit a crusader to any who could harm his person or possessions, which the indulgences essentially meant, listen, you go kill this guy, you can do whatever the fuck you want to this guy, it's not going to be counted as a sin. They could have dragged him out, raped him and his family, killed his kids, like ate him, and they would have essentially thought, oh, God's okay with it, which is insane that we did that as humanity, essentially, to each other for years. But whatever. In the months before the battle, border clashes intensified. In July, the Bolognese entered the Modenese territory and laid waste to the fields in the section between the canals by fire and sword. So in August, a Bolognese rabble headed by their podesta spent 2 weeks ravaging other lands of Modena. In September, Mantua took its turn. Essentially, it was essentially like have you ever been in a three-way with like a bro? You get done fucking, and so you pass it off to like your other bro, and you're like, okay, hurry up. And you kind of like take a break, recharge a little bit, and then they took turns fucking Modena. Just back and forth. Once in the mouth, once in the ass, one in the vagina. Modena got royally fucked. And at the end of that month, the strategic Bolognese Rocca of Monte Vigilio was betrayed to Modena by malcontents. So luckily, Modena got a break. They were able to escape the rough fucking, and 2 renegade Castellanans were decapitated. And so the Battle of Zappolino, the only battle of the War of the Oaken Bucket, was fought in November of 1325 between forces representing the Italian towns of Bologna and Modena, an incident in the series of raids and reprisals between the 2 cities that were part of the larger conflicts of the Welfs and the Ghibellinesi. The Modenese were victorious. So, despite getting Eiffel Towered essentially for the past few years, like almost, I think it was like 8 years of just getting Eiffel Towered back and forth between the Welfs, the Modenese were able to come up on top here. Though many clashes between Welfs and Ghibellinese loomed larger to contemporaries than to historians, the unusually large encounter involved 4,000 estimated cavalry and some 35,000 foot soldiers, and 2,000 men lost their lives. The location of the battle, at the foot of the hill just outside the castle walls, is now a frazione of the municipality of Castello di Serravalle, Emilia Romagna. So, if you want to go see it, you have to go get permission and shit. But it's pretty cool. So, their boundaries had been set by Frederick II, Holy Roman Emperor a century earlier, but competitive friction along their mutual monarchs between the Ghibellinese Modena and with the emperor as a patron of Welf Bologna, with the Pope as a patron, had flared over decades. And as the Bolognese chronicler Matteo Grifoni tells it, the militia and the rabble of Bologna, headed by their podesta, aided by allies from Florence and Romagna, besieged the fortress of Monte Vigilio. Quickly an opposing force arrived, headed by Cangrande della Scala, the leader of the Ghibellinese faction, Azone Visconti of Milan, with many of his professional German troops, and Rinaldo Marchese of Ferrara, leading forces of Modena. So it was like almost like 8-town battle, essentially, or like 8-city battle with all their troops coming in. Mantua, Cangrande soon departed for Verona, but the Bolognese took their captain, the Condottiero of Malatesta, Lord of Rimini, and the battle would officially take place on the 15th of November, 1325, around sunset. The Bolognese had 30,000 foot soldiers, as I had said, who were haphazardly armed. They were given not the best swords. They're a little rusty, maybe some pitchforks, maybe like a club or two, and that's what they had. And 2,500 horsemen facing 2,800 horsemen on the Modenese side, who were supported by 5,000 foot soldiers who were much more well armed. I'm talking they had fancy ass spears, maybe a gun or two, maybe not a gun, because it was 1325. It doesn't say exactly what weapons they had, but they might have had the rocket cannons by then, or the arm cannons, hand cannons. The Bonacolosi devised a plan to feign a river crossing in an effort to distract part of the Bolognese forces. They put this tactic in action a day prior to the main battle at Zappolino. During the cover of night, the Modenese headed it south to the modern town of Marano sul Panaro. They crossed the river, and after a short skirmish with a Bolognese vanguard, began to march towards Zappolino. They essentially whooped the Bolognese vanguard's ass. It wasn't even... They call it a skirmish, but no one died here. So, besides the, Bolognese vanguard. The Bolognese, realizing they had fallen for a trap, began to recall the men that had been sent to the north. The Modenese were positioned close to where the town of Ziriberga stands today, while the Bolognese were positioned on a slope coming down from the hill that the fortress was located on. Bonaccorsi realized that if he did not strike now when the Bolognese were unorganized, it would be far more difficult to attain victory. The Bolognese began an attack on the Bolognese lines, and soon heavy fighting erupted. Bonaccorsi sent his cavalry around the side in order to attack the Bolognese from behind. The battle was over by nightfall, within a couple of hours essentially. The Bolognese were routed. The Modenese advanced to the very walls of Bologna, it doesn't matter, and destroyed the castles of Corspiano, Zola, Smagoscia, Anzola, Casafranco, Fiumazzo, and the Chiusa del Reno near Casalecchio, which diverted the river towards the city. They did not attempt a siege of the city, but scornfully organized a palio outside the very gates of the city, ad aetrium memoriam passurium, a palio, by the way, is a party or like a kind of like circus, essentially. So they were so petty they threw like a circus outside after they beat them, essentially calling them clowns, which is hilarious. And they would chant this phrase, the Atrenum memoriam passurium et aeternium bonanicium scandalum, or to the eternal memory of those who sent out on the expedition and the eternal shame of Bologna. Just shitting on them, essentially. And then returned to Modena, brandishing a bucket taken from the well outside Porta San Felice. Why they took the bucket? Literally just because they fucking could. It was just a shit on them. They're like, listen, this is the only thing that was worthwhile in your city. Was this bucket. Everything else was shit. It was an insult, essentially. The bucket is just a very funny insult, saying that they weren't worth jack shit. And 26 captured notables of Bologna were incarcerated for the next 11 weeks in Modena. So let's kind of go after the aftermath. David Abulafia in the New Cambridge Medieval History asserts, Ghibelline's influence of the region was consolidated by a victory at Zeppelino. However, peace agreements in the following January returned Monteviglio and the other castles to Bologna. It returned locally to status quo before, which was probably paid for privately as a ransom with coin in the hands of Passarino Bonaccorsi, who was leading the Bolognese. At Bologna, the coat of arms of Pope John XXII was displayed in conjunction with those of Robert d'Anjou, showing that the old alliance of the Avignon papacy and the House of Anjou was still viable in some eyes. And if you recognize those names, that is because that was the house that would eventually start the War of the Roses. Which, if you've listened to that episode of mine, I thank you for listening to all that. That was a really long, very confusing episode. Now to look at some like modern aftermaths. On March 25th of 2015, the Parte Guelfa was reconstituted as Christian order and archconfraternity to serve the Catholic Church and the Catholic Archdiocese of Florence, guided by the Captain General Andrea Claudio Galuso under the custody of Consul Luciano Artusi. The mayor of Florence established the headquarters of the Reborn Guelph Party in the historic Palazzo di Parte Guelfa in the city. The battle is also famous for the wooden bucket the Modenese took as spoils from the Bolognese. Though it is not mentioned by Grifoni, the unusual booty was venerated in Modena in remembrance of the victory, which is, hilarious. It was essentially just like a group of people shitting on other people, and they venerated that object. It became like an important historical artifact, which is really cool. The history of the bucket was told in Alessandro Tassoni's satirical poem La Secchia Rapita, or The Rape of the Bucket. It was still seen in the basement of the Torre della Ghirlandina in 1911. You might be able to see it today. So, to end today's quarrel, I will recite the ending of the poem that made the oaken bucket, or the War of the Oaken Bucket, so famous. Good people all, who, with a merry face, have been attentive to my wandering song. This is a history true, replete with grace. But to me no tuneful notes belong. Of different had it been, with power to trace, the muses' haunts, and they inspired my tongue. But since my aim was good, this credit to give, and he who reads it happy, may he live. And thus ends today's Historical Quarrel. That takes us out of today's episode, guys. What'd y'all think? What are your thoughts and takeaways? I did kind of find it funny that essentially that this battle really was just like a smaller battle and a smaller rivalry that was between the kings of the Holy Roman Empire and the Pope of the Catholic Church, which, kind of makes sense. I feel like a lot of those events in the past kind of do trickle down from bigger conflicts. These rivalries will cause in smaller communities and cause like these smaller battles or skirmishes to happen. And I guess you couldn't call this a small battle. It's still pretty fucking big. It was like two armies going against each other. But what made it so interesting is the fact that because of all these events that happened in the past between the popes and the kings, these people sort of like got into the politics of it all and identified themselves as like, no, I am this way, I support the papacy, or no, I am this way and I support the emperor. And that is the only way that I'm going to live my life. Very similar to us Americans today, really many people around the world today who will take the politics of the country and use it as a marker to identify themselves and to essentially identify the enemy or people who aren't a part of your tribe if they have different political beliefs. And we've been doing it forever, It's just, who is the enemy? Who is not part of the tribe? And this is just an example of how these two big conflicts led into this much smaller conflict where a bucket would get stolen. That's really the reason why I chose it is because I thought it was funny that a bucket was the most valuable prize that they won from Bologna. So I don't know. What are your thoughts? How do you feel this story kind of sheds light on our actions today? Does it impact you in a way that does make you think that maybe you should not identify yourself so hard into like a political spectrum, or not get so, I guess, invested? It's an important aspect of our lives for sure, but it shouldn't be like the end all be all factor of whether or not you're okay with someone or whether or not you're okay with killing someone, unless they're like actually evil, like Nazis. Then it's fine. But if they're not evil and they don't seem to be like hurting people, I don't know. It's like a little silly to kind of to do that. So I had a good time. I found it interesting. Again, I was interviewed recently by the Passion Podcast. Please go check that out. It'd be super cool. Especially if you could just like leave her a message saying, hey, Tyler from Historical Coral sent me to go watch some episodes. That'd be pretty dope. Pretty dope to know that you guys did that. Let's see. Oh, yes, the new podcast. Please get ready for that. It's gonna be fun. I'm gonna be recording the first episode, hopefully this Thursday. The Thursday that this episode drops that you're listening to today. So it will probably be a little bit before that first episode is out to listen to, but I'm excited for it. I I've really missed like hanging out with like some of my buddy who moved to South Dakota essentially. So I'm excited to do that. If you enjoyed this, please share it with other people. I want to spread this show as far as I can go because I'd like to. I don't know. I think I found a joy in essentially helping people learn about historical events, and I have a joy in like writing jokes now. At least I try to write jokes. The next episode, I think I'm getting my writing down a little better. So it'd be nice to know like what jokes you guys enjoyed, what you did enjoy. Sorry if I offended any of you Catholics out there, but know that it was primarily directed toward priests who are scumbags, and unfortunately, and listen, I was LDS at one point in my life, and I know that church is full of scumbags as well. So like, I'm not immune to it. Nobody is immune to criticism. No, it's not directed at you, and I don't hate you for your religious belief. I do hate scumbag priests that diddle kids, though. I fucking hate that. And people who use religion as a way to assert authority or dominance over other people. I think that's fucked up. I don't think that's right. I think people are more than the religion, and they should identify themselves as more than just being, Catholic or Mormon or whatever. Doesn't really matter to me. So, but if you're a scumbag and you diddle kids, I hate you, and I don't want you listening to my show. So get the fuck out of here. Let's see. Other than that, if you aren't that scumbag, please share it with people who aren't scumbags, or at least you are pretty sure aren't. I'd like them to give it a listen. I want to interact with you guys too. So follow us on social media, on our Instagram, Facebook, Threads. You can follow me on Threads. It's just Tyler Eckhart. And it's like it's funny on Threads. The photo of me is an old picture of me and my wife kissing in our engagement photos. I have not updated it in years. I don't plan on updating it. I have a hard time with social media. If this show ever takes off and I make enough money, I think one of the first things I'm doing is hiring someone to manage social media for me, because I hate doing that. I love talking with people, but I hate managing posts. I hate having to do the marketing myself. It is so frustrating. Word of mouth is so much better. I really hope I made the show good enough that you feel comfortable enough to share it with other people. Because, oh my God, it is hard to just like, okay, so I cut up this clip and then I like edit this and like, put it on TikTok, and that's going to get like 1 million views, dude. Or like I put it on YouTube, that's going to get like 1 billion views. I have no fucking clue how to do that. And I want to talk to people to learn a little more on how to do that. But goddamn, that's some hard shit. So, but yeah, please email me at historicalquarrels@gmail.com. Let me know if you have like topics that you want me to talk about or do like a little more digging up on. I'll do it, because why not? Or hell, even if you've listened to previous episodes and you want me to redo something or like go over it again, I've been kind of looking at doing that, especially like my first couple episodes, because those were so goddamn bad. Oh man, I listened to it the other day and I was like, oh, that's so cringy. Oh, it's so bad. Just talk normal, Tyler. You can do it. So, yeah. Again, I appreciate you guys. I love you all so much. You have a good one, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.